Phil Heatley.
Mr Speaker, I think as the general public experienced last year, National was very focused on concentrating on getting the government's finances under control. With the recession deepening during that period, people threatened with losing their jobs and a very difficult time for New Zealanders and families. This year, of course, we're squarely focused on the economy and building the recovery. As Bill English has often said, the recession didn't begin after we came into government. It was well ahead of the rest of the world in New Zealand. In fact, we'd been in recession for some time. It's just it didn't show up till the whole world came under pressure. We had a number of approaches during the last term of government and following the last budget. One of these, of course, was a big focus on reining in government spending where there was no gain, where there was not a dollar of value for every dollar spent. Secondly, we looked at ways in which we could curb regulation, and you saw the Building Act passed and also the Resource Management Act fixed as well on a very high level, and now we focus on more specific Resource Management Act reforms. But lastly, and most importantly, was the fiscal stimulus package that we introduced last budget. And you recall, Mr Speaker, that was about $500 million that was put in as a capital injection to housing, to roading and to education. And the thought that went behind that was quite simple. What we want to do is we do want to spend some money into the economy, but spend it on capital items, not operating items. So infrastructure. So it was essentially an infrastructure package. So we looked at housing, roading and education and decided we want to inject capital into those areas. Secondly, we wanted to do work which was urgent and had actually been on the government's books collecting dust for a decade. So the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Housing went away and dusted off all the plans for the roads and the houses and the schools that could have been upgraded in the last decade and said, right, is this still a good idea? Is it worth injecting capital into these projects, this school, this road or this Housing New Zealand estate? If so, is it already consented? Because we'd like the fiscal stimulus package to have immediate effect, and it'd be good if the consents were already there. And thirdly, is there a workforce alongside those construction projects that would benefit? And it worked very, very well. I can say for the fiscal stimulus package, which was about $124.5 million into the state housing sector, we did about 11,000 upgrades of state houses over those sort of 16, 18 months. That was the plan, Mr Speaker, and they're trucking well on their way to the 30th of June of this year. It's 11,000 houses, either painted or insulated top and bottom, or there's clean heating, or the kitchen's been renovated, or the bathroom's been renovated. That type of essential work was done. So it was a boost package during the recession. And why we focused on upgrades, Mr Speaker, as opposed to new buildings, why the focus was more on upgrades and new buildings, was because you didn't need a consent for a whole lot of the upgrade work. The $120 million fiscal stimulus could be virtually immediate because you didn't have to go through that consenting package. Also, a large number of houses were uninsulated and were in a serious state of disrepair. So there were 940 healthy housing upgrades and also, of course, added on to the program to increase the number of state houses that was already planned. There were 87 new homes on top of that that were built on as part of the Jobs and Growth package. And that was important, that we built new homes rather than bought existing ones. The main reason for that is, of course, people were employed. And I can say that Housing New Zealand going forward also now have a preference to either build their own homes on land Housing New Zealand owns or lease homes that are newly built on new sections. And the reason being, in both those cases, it increases housing supply, whereas just purchasing houses, which might happen on occasion, of course, doesn't increase housing supply. So it's a very, very significant stimulus package, which of course ends on the 30th of June. But this year, we're squarely focused on the economy and some other things. So, first of all, the budget is going to put economic growth, this budget, at centre stage. Its overriding aim is to tilt the economy towards people working harder, longer, investing more energy into their work and getting the rewards for it. So it's an economy that is going to be tilted towards work, tilted towards saving and investment, and also exports. And it's going to be tilted away from what has been the case, a lot of borrowing and a lot of spending. So we're moving away from spending towards saving. We're moving away towards making sure that people are incentivised to work rather than not work. And so it goes, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, our major tax reform package features across-the-board tax cuts that help families get ahead, and that's where the reward is for work, Mr. Speaker. Thirdly, the budget shows an improved fiscal outlook, where both Crown debt and budget deficits are better than forecast. Last year, it wasn't good news, Mr. Speaker. This year, it's still tough looking ahead, but there's certainly been an improvement, and we want to do better still. Finally, the government has been very, very strict, and the Finance Minister very, very strict with ministers, making sure that we keep within our $1.1 billion allocation for new spending, making sure that we're not just increasing spending for the sake of it, but every extra dollar we spend is a dollar's worth of investment. So the Finance Minister's asked government departments and all agencies to do more with what they have. And that's a very significant shift from the previous government's approach. We're making sure we test every program before it's refunded or gets a boost in funding. So government departments and agencies will receive little or no money for the next few years, unless, of course, you're in the area of health, which receives the biggest slice of new money, an extra $2.1 billion over the next 4 years. Including $512 million in this next financial year. And as you've heard from the Education Minister, Anne Tolley, schooling and early childhood education will receive an extra $1.4 billion over the next 4 years, including $417 million in this next financial year. So that's very, very significant investments, Mr. Speaker. I'd have to say one of the investments which we're most pleased with in the last couple of years has been in the Housing Innovation Fund. And I'd just like to acknowledge members across the House who began that fund originally with about $12 million. Much of their money went into the development of housing organisations. We've switched the fund around a bit. We've increased it from $12 to $20 million and said that the money has to be spent on building or purchasing houses. So no longer can the money be spent on development of plans or organisations or that type of thing, what they call capacity building. It must be spent on capital expenditure. So that's a change that we made, as well as the boost. And the Housing Innovation Fund has been extended again this year, another $20 million. $16 million will be spent on grants or loans to support social and affordable housing, and a further $4 million to meet the cost of interest-free loans that are provided to community housing providers. And the Murray demonstration projects and partnerships will continue also this coming financial year. So far in the current year, it's resulted in 96 new housing units, and not all the announcements are finished yet. But I can say the New Zealand Housing Foundation has been allocated $3 million to go towards its $12 million project for 30 affordable home ownership opportunities in Auckland. So we've contributed $3 million and a total of 12, which shows you how we can leverage up the input from either the private sector or other housing providers. Salvation Army received $2 million for 15 new rental properties, and other trusts such as Habitat for Humanity, Monte Cecilia, Queens Tate Lakes,